Fuck Omar.
There it is. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of OmniBros Live. It is going to be an amazing episode. Today we have with us the legendary Fabian NIcieza. And there he is right there, that guy. But before we get started with that, Fabian NIcieza wrote this awesome comic book called The Wedding of Cyclops and Phoenix. And the Omnibus just dropped yesterday, and you can pick that up at instanttrade.com. Yeah. I'm sure you got like 15 copies sent your way, right?
Yeah, sure. Marvel sends you lots of copies nowadays.
So you can pick up your copy at instanttrades.com at 42% off with free shipping over $50 and more. So that is our sponsor, instanttrades.com. Fabian, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, guys.
No, it is completely our pleasure. I try to get the fanboy out a little bit earlier by promising you to come to my house and do a private signing and stuff like that. Misery style, of course.
Like it is going to be, yes.
But you for real were like my middle school, my high school years. Like everything you wrote was, I mean, that was the stuff I was reading. It had your name on it. And I have no idea how you ever slept. Because at one time, I think you were writing like 20 books.
That used to be a full head of hair. It actually, I'm not kidding, it literally was flying off of my head during those years. After I'd shower, I'd see a pile of my hair on the shower floor. It was actually kind of frightening.
Oh, man.
But I knew I had to get the comics out there so little 13-year-old Omar could be reading them. So it was worth the sacrifice.
Yeah, I remember having many arguments with my friends about Deadpool. I was like, man, Deadpool's the new shit. And they were like, dude, he's just a poor man's Deathstroke the Terminator.
Yeah, they were wrong. Totally wrong. Go figure.
So how did all that get started at Marvel? I know you started at Marvel in the mid-'80s. And then how did you go from the position that you had to an editor saying, hey, this guy can write?
I started working at the company in '85, and by '86 I was Marvel's advertising manager. So all the house ads you saw in the comics, all the promotional posters that the direct market used to get, all the co-op ads and sell sheets and all of that stuff, I was responsible for. So I was in the office 9 to 5. I had my job, and a huge part of that job was interacting with editorial and sales. I always wanted to write. I was getting to write ad copy, which was great because that's what I went to college to learn to do, and I was getting to do it for Marvel Comics, so it was fantastic. But I also saw that everybody tried to write like the first week they were on the job. Like an assistant editor would get a job and they'd drop a 500-page manuscript on an editor's desk saying, please read my magnum opus where Aunt May dies in the first panel. And editors, I knew editors didn't have an interest or a time for that. So I kind of just bided my time just a little bit. Patience is not one of my virtues, but I just looked, listened, and learned. And I realized the Spider-Man office often churned through inventory stories. They were buying a lot of them. So I went to Jim Owsley, who's now Christopher Priest, but he was Jim Owsley then, and he was the editor, and I sold him a Spider-Man inventory story. That was my first sale, and a great life lesson because he never sent it out to an artist to draw, and he got fired before it ever went sent to an artist. And the new editor, Jim Salicrup, didn't like the story, so he killed it. So I got a kill fee for my very first sale. So my first comic book sold to Marvel never even got drawn or published, and it was a Spider-Man story. And several months later, the New Universe books launched, and they were an abject disaster on the schedule. The production schedule was a nightmare. So all the editors who had a New Universe book were desperately scrambling to try to fill their issues with something. And this is how desperate they were that Bob Budiansky walked out of his office as I was walking down the corridor to go to another editor's office, and he goes, Fabian, you want to write, don't you? And I said, yeah, sure, Bob. At some point, I'm going to give it a shot. I definitely want to try. I sold an inventory story to Jim, but you know, we don't have an artist for it, blah, blah, blah. He goes, have you read Cyforce, which was one of the New Universe titles? And I said, yeah, sure, I've read it. I hadn't. And he goes, can you give me some pitches? I said, yeah, sure. So I went home that day and I read the first 3 issues that we had from our comp piles, and I gave him 2 pages of pitches, a total of about 10 pitches total, 5 on each page, real quick, short paragraphs so that it was easy for him to understand. And I also did something that the advertising manager and me kind of figured out. Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief, had this huge editorial philosophy. Every story had to have a can't-must conflict. For Spider-Man, it's I can't go fight Doc Ock because Aunt May needs this medicine that I have, but I must go fight Doc Ock because he's robbing a bank right now and people could get hurt. There's Peter Parker's can't-must conflict. How do you balance that? That's what Shooter wanted in every story if he could get it. So the editors were constantly harping on that and trying to figure out where in their plot they ensured themselves they had a can't-must conflict. So I made sure that every one of my pitches had a little tagline at the bottom of it, and I literally in bold typed out can't-must conflict with a semicolon, and I wrote out what it was. So I tried to make it as idiot-proof as I possibly could, which, by the way, if you're pitching to editors, that's a very important thing to do. So he came up to me the next day and he goes, I want to do this one first. That's what he said. And I was just like, yes. And that was my first sale. And I kept working 9 to 5 and I kept selling little by little. Shooter made me the monthly writer of Cyforce within months, which was very fast. And then he got fired and the books got consolidated, and the new editor, Howard Mackey, it was a little rough at first as to whether he wanted to keep me on the book or not, because I was being foisted on them. If Shooter had stayed on the job, I would have been considered his golden boy, which I don't think necessarily would have been a good thing for me. But the truth is that he got fired. Tom took over. I started to write more. The editors saw that I could write. And they saw that I could handle my deadlines, and then I just kept selling and pitching. And after Cyforce got canceled, I thought I was going to get another monthly book just like that, and it didn't happen. So I was kind of frustrated for a full year. That's like 88. That was my year of scut work, I call it. Annual backups, inventory stories. Marvel Comics Presents was just starting to gear themselves up editorially, and it was going to be a weekly book, so they were going to be hiring a lot of people to do a lot of work. So I sold a lot of stories to Marvel Comics Presents, which actually some of them took 50, 60, 70 issues to appear in print. And that's what I did until I got New Warriors. New Warriors is really what made me.
So let's go back to that. Let's go back to New Warriors, because to me, I don't know how you feel.
I feel it's a wonderful book.
This is the greatest thing that I know everybody's like Deadpool and Cable and to say, but to me, this was the greatest thing that you created.
I'm pretty proud of it to this day. I'm not a huge fan of my own work, but I am a pretty big fan of that book. I'm pretty proud of what that book was, who it sold to, how well it did in comparison to what its expectations were. I'm pretty proud that I got to work with 2 artists that I call friends to this day, who were great collaborators to work with. I got to do almost everything I wanted to do with the book from the very beginning. And Danny Fingeroth, the editor, and I would fight tooth and nail about a lot of stuff, but all of it always was for the betterment of the book. And I pushed too far in one direction, and he would try to pull me too far back in the other direction, and we ended up meeting in the middle, which actually worked out really, really, really well more often than not for the book.
How did you get? Okay, so I mean,
how did I get that book?
How did you get the gig? Because Tom DeFalco created these characters in an issue of Thor. Avengers.
Tom and Ron flipped through a Marvel Universe handbook, and they picked out a bunch of characters to use. And Tom created Night Thrasher.
Right. So you had a bunch of C-list characters. So it kind of is like what Suicide Squad and then like what really Thunderbolts was, right? But you were doing it right there in the 90s with a bunch of kids, with a bunch of no-names.
The way it worked back then, and now in many ways is similar, is they have a new title. An editor is going to call up a couple people and ask for pitches, and a couple other people are going to walk up to the editor and say, "Can I pitch?" Right? And Tom and Mark Grunwald both encouraged me to pitch to Danny. And Danny had just been brought back on staff. And Danny's a conservative guy by nature and a nervous guy by nature. And just getting rehired by Marvel after having been fired by Marvel a few years earlier, he was going to be a little wary of hiring an unproven monthly writer, kid, obnoxious pain in the ass like me, right? But Mark and Tom said, take his pitch. So Danny said, okay, I'll take his pitch. 6 months from when I originally pitched, he still hadn't made a decision on the book. And I was livid. I was just beyond myself. There was one Friday he said that he was going to make a decision by Friday, and on Friday he didn't make it. And we had half-day Fridays back then. So I left the office after at like 1 o'clock, 1:30, met a bunch of people at a bar, and I just lined up like 5, 6 shots, which I don't ever do. I don't drink like that. I just drink beer. Or back then, I would just drink beer. I just lined shots up, and I just downed a shot and a beer. Like for the next hour or two, I was faced. I was just out of it. That's how frustrated I was that it took so long. Danny finally decided to let me do the book. The wait was probably one of the best things that ever happened for me and for the title, because I had 6 months to think about it in detail, like everything I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it, how I wanted to do it. The first 2 years is almost to a T how I broke it down. Not exactly, but almost to a T. And there were some issues and some scenes that happened like between issues 16 and 25 that I had laid out in a notepad back before I even started the book, you know? So that the one reason the book was so strong is because I had had so much time to think about how to make it as good as I possibly could. And Mark Bagley was in the same place. He wanted to make his bones. He wanted to prove he could do a monthly superhero title for Marvel. He and I both wanted to prove ourselves, which is a great combination to have. Two guys that are hungry to succeed. He and I hit it off really, really well. I thought he was an excellent artist for the book, and when Larry Malstead took over as inker, I thought the book really took off and looked the way it should look. And you ask me, how I did it. I really just looked at Marv Wolfman and George Perez's Teen Titans. That's really all I did. I looked at the template for how they took a few pre-existing established characters, a few new characters, and how they mixed them together, and how they told the stories of the new Teen Titans in the early 80s, the first year or two, and I didn't copy it, but I used it as my template. I used it as kind of like my holy grail. I'm
surprised Marvel didn't like. That was such a smart move, because Teen Titans at one time was selling as many copies as Uncanny X-Men.
Yeah.
So for Marvel not to do that earlier, and still to this day, it took years for Young Avengers to come out. I mean, where were they? We had the New Warriors, right? And we had
the New Warriors for a while. Look, it's about personal taste and personal inclinations. Jim Shooter wasn't a huge fan of teen superheroes. Tom and Mark were a huge fan of DC's teen sidekick characters. Marvel has never traditionally been a teen sidekick company, because Stan Lee from the 40s didn't like teen sidekicks.
Killed off Bucky.
Yeah, well, he didn't like teen sidekicks. He's on the record as having said that many times. And Tom and Mark wanted Marvel's version of Teen Titans. It wasn't New Mutants, because New Mutants was never meant to be that, So they basically wanted Marvel's version of Teen Titans. That's all. It's not a matter of copying Teen Titans, because I don't think the two books are copies of each other. It's about taking advantage of any of the young characters we had that had Marvel Universe tie-ins as opposed to X-Men Universe tie-ins, and making them work, and plumbing their history and plumbing their connections, like Namorita and Firestar and Nova and even Marvel Boy all had tremendous Marvel Universe connections, and those are the ways that you start to develop your stories.
Yeah. Sorry guys, I've been hogging. You guys can ask your questions.
I think Gabe had something.
Yeah, no, I was just because we've been talking about crossovers and everything like that. I kind of wanted to get into how you ended up in the X-Men office, Fabian, and how that ended up you going into the Deadpool lifestyle, creating that character, and kind of the hectic, chaotic environment there was, especially when Executioner's Song was thrown together. And I know you were in charge of that for the most part. And I've read articles and heard interviews where you said a lot of that was kind of just thrown together at the last moment because of Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, and the other guys leaving for Image. So I kind of want to see how that all kind of worked out for you and how that came about.
Well, I mean, as with all things, it's not something that happens overnight, really. I'd already sold some classic X-Men backup stories to Bob Harris, the editor. I'd written an inventory story of Codename Spitfire for Bob Harris, the editor. That was the second comic I ever sold. Right after Cyforce #9 was Codename Spitfire, then another Cyforce issue. Then I was named the monthly Cyforce writer. So after 3 comics I sold, I got a monthly book. But the second one was a Spitfire story for Bob. And I was friendly with Bob, and he saw that I was doing both Alpha Flight and New Warriors. He approved my usage of Wolverine in 4 issues of Alpha Flight when I took over the book. So he started to see that, okay, this guy can handle a superhero book. He can handle the Wolverine character. He's handling the Alpha Flight characters pretty well. And I was going to start getting. I helped him out. Bailed him out, really, when he was having a lot of problems with Claremont. I scripted an issue off of a Claremont plot, and then Chris wasn't going to write the next issue, and I wrote it. I think that's like 279 and 280. I think I wrote I'm the first writer. I'm the first X-Men issue without a Chris Claremont credit in 17 years. Was me writing the issue, which is not something I'm proud of, to tell you the truth. It's not something I'm all that thrilled about. But I broke his 17-year run on the book. And it was because him and Bob were having problems. I wasn't even aware of the extent of the problems at the time that I did that. I was actually misled into thinking I was assisting because there were vacations happening at the time and they couldn't handle the story load, but it wasn't exactly the case. So I'd already been doing work for that editorial office. So when they were looking for a new scripter for New Mutants, because Bob knew that he was going to give Rob the chance to plot the book, Rob and Bob discussed a variety of people, and they settled on asking me, and I said I would do it because I was already doing 2 monthly books, and quite frankly, scripting off of somebody else's plots is pretty easy. So that's why I decided to do it. I knew that Rob was really excited about what was going to be happening, and I knew the book was going to sell a lot better. I didn't know what it was going to turn into, but I liked Rob's enthusiasm and wanted to get in on that. It was fun. So that's why I did New Mutants.
That's great. With the terminology like scripting and plotter, how does that relationship work? What is the basic relationship between a plotter and the scripter?
Marvel had traditionally worked under a Marvel method since the 60s, and the Marvel method really came about because Stan Lee didn't have time or the attention span to write out full scripts or to fully plot out a book. And he was very collaborative with his artists. Some were given more leeway than others, but Stan would either write up a 1-page or a 2-page plot outline, and then the artist would break that down into a 22-page or 21-page story. In some cases, Stan would just say something on the phone. I wanted FF to fight a gigantic cosmic being, and Jack Kirby would go, okay, and he'd turn that into 22 pages of story, and then Stan would go, who's this silver guy on a board? And Jack would go, I thought someone that powerful should have like a herald, and Stan's like, okay, fine, what do you want to call him? Silver Surfer? Okay, that's fine too.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So what ended up happening is through the 70s, as new writers started to come in, they continued to work under a plot first standpoint. A plot is basically your story broken down loosely, sometimes by page, sometimes by scenes, pages 1 through 3, pages 4 through 6, and the artist then is given the leeway about how they're going to visually pace that, how many panels they're going to break that down to get that information down on a page, right? Then the penciled pages go back to the writer, and the writer writes the dialogue. That's scripting the book. Okay, we worked plot first. The artist would draw the pencils, then we would script those pencils. Okay, and then those that would get lettered, and then there's your book. Other companies and even some writers at Marvel worked full script, which is what most people do nowadays. page 1, panel 1, meticulous detail of everything in the panel, what the camera angle is. Let's make our artist as bored as possible, and off you go. And that's a full script. I've been working full script now almost exclusively for the company since 2004 because the industry just changed its model, the way it worked. Editors changed generationally, and the writers changed generationally. So the way it's done has definitely changed. But back then, this is how we did it.
How did that in the case of Deadpool, Rob Liefeld, Louise Simonson was off the book, and then they approached you to come and script.
Well, in order for Rob to get the plot the book, Louise was not going to be on the book any longer, and Rob and Louise were not clicking together in terms of their ideas. And Bob made a determination that all editors sometimes have to make: who's the horse I'm going to ride? And he decided that the horse he wanted to ride at that point was Rob, because Louise had been on the book for 40 issues or something, and sales had really flattened out, and Bob wasn't excited by the book, and Rob wasn't even excited by the book, and Rob had all these ideas about what he wanted to do. So Bob said, let's give this kid a chance to plot the book and tell the stories he wants to tell. But he's 21 years old. He's never scripted a book in his life. His facility with the English language is a little limited at this time. So let's get someone who's a little more facile with the English language, but is still young and hep enough to know what those kids and that was me. And I'd known Rob already. We talked several times. We talked about working on stuff together. He and I were going to do my Soviet super soldier story for Marvel Comics Presents at one point together, because he really would like those characters. But Rob is one of those guys that wants every flavor in the ice cream store. He gets super excited about every flavor on the board, and he wants a scoop of everything, but he can't eat a scoop of everything. It's too much at once. So Rob's going to plot the book. Okay, great. I'll script it off his plots. Okay, great. Tell me what you want to do. Tell me who these characters are, what their backgrounds are, give me information on them before I script, so that I have a rough idea of what's in your head. And as with any artist turned writer, oftentimes the ideas in their head are very visually driven. So Rob's ideas were very visually driven. He didn't give me a handbook, a Marvel Universe handbook on these characters. It wasn't like a Mark Grunwaldian text. He just gave me a verbal description of a lot of these guys, and barely any border notes on any of the original sketches he did. And then we talked them through. And it was Gideon, it was Domino, and it was Deadpool in the first issue. And when we got to Deadpool, he just said he's a mercenary who went to Wolverine's Weapon X program, and he got superpowers. So he's really fast, he's really agile, he's got tremendous stamina, and he can heal himself from wounds. I said, okay, fine. And Rob said he's like Spider-Man meets Punisher. He's going to be bouncing all over Cable, all around him when he fights, and Cable's like a big lumbering tank. And you can see me on screen doing big lumbering tank. And Deadpool's gonna flit all around him like Spider-Man. So when he said Spider-Man meets Punisher, I said, and a little bit of George too. That meant George Perez, and that's because Rob loved George Perez, as I love George Perez. And he goes, yeah, you got me. But that was the swords, the harness belts, all that stuff. No different than what Michael Golden was doing on G.I. Joe covers with Snake Eyes, and what Art Adams was doing with Long Shot. No different than what George was doing. Nobody complains that George ripped off himself, because he designed Taskmaster and Deathstroke 1 year apart. Taskmaster was designed in January of 1 year, and Deathstroke was designed in December of that same year.
Taskmaster had a hoodie.
Take a look at those characters, okay? So Rob just drew all these influences from all the artists of the 80s that he loved, and it was Spider-Man meets Punisher. That's all it was, and when I got to scripting the issue like 2 weeks later, because it was the back end of the book, and I'm working off of fax layouts, I just decided that I was bored writing steroid, aggressively posed, tough characters. Let's make this guy a pain in the ass, because Rob had described him as Spider-Man meets Punisher. So let's do a little more Spider-Man. That's all it was. It wasn't excessive. It wasn't overly done. I just wanted a different voice and tone. And I also really wanted to see what I could get out of Cable. How does Cable react to this pain in the ass? How does Cable deal with this guy who won't shut up? How does Cable deal with a mercenary who is less than what he wants out of a mercenary soldier. If you're coming to kill me, I would prefer that you be a professional mercenary soldier, not this idiot, you know? So to me, the whole scene was not as much about Deadpool as it was about Cable. And Rob gave me a gift for that because he didn't tell me or show us what happened to Deadpool between the point where he's defeated and tied up and the next page. It just vanishes. So I'm scripting this, and I got to get the script done. I think it was Thursday night. I had to have the script delivered on Friday, and what's going on? Where'd he go? And I'm sitting there at home, and I could call Rob up. I was like, forget it. He just didn't even draw him. He just didn't bother to draw him. Is there a prison in the X Mansion that I don't know about that Chris Claremont never showed us? Do they call the police and have him arrested? What do they do? Do they kill him and bury him in the backyard? None of those options made sense to me. So I had in a line of dialogue, Domino say, where's Deadpool? And Cable says, I FedExed him back to his boss. So Cable shoved Deadpool in a box and literally Federal Expressed him back to Tolliver. And it's Cable sending a message to Tolliver. It's also Cable showing that he has a sense of humor, you know? And a lot of the readers got that. So I felt I got something out of Cable for that scene. But then all the mail started coming in, and it was Rob's first issue, and our sales were like 200, 300% more than normal. The mail was also 200 to 300%. The usual, this is great, we're on video, because I usually do this verbally. The New Mutants mail was usually about this much, okay? After Rob's first issue, 98, it was this much.
Oh, jeez.
And I read all the mail, because I always read it before the editor got to it. Since I worked in the office, I would take it, open it, read it, because I wanted to see what the reader said, unfiltered from what the editor's perceptions of what they wanted me to hear. And 75% of the mail said, this guy was funny, bring him back. This guy was funny, bring him back. It was like, okay. A week and a half later,
I was one of those guys.
Bob stopped me in the hallway, and he goes, did you read the mail yet? I go, no, not yet. And he goes, they think this guy's funny. We should bring him back. I'm not kidding. It was like Obi-Wan Kenobi. These are not the droids you want. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure Rob's planning to bring them back. The first time we could do that was X-Force #2. But we knew how much of a chord the character had struck with people immediately. Otherwise, as I have to tell people all the time who say he wasn't popular when he first came out, otherwise, why would we have made him one of 5 trading cards in X-Force #1? Right.
Exactly. He was even in the trading cards for the Jim Lee X-Men card set, too.
Yeah.
And visually, he looks so cool. Like, everybody was like, I don't even know what this guy sounds like, but he is so cool. He's got 2 swords, and he kind of looks like Spider-Man. Yeah. Look, it's a 12-year-old's wet dream. Everything in X-Force was a 12-year-old's wet dream. We knew that that's what we were doing it for. So a lot of older readers or a lot of who read X-Men stuff weren't thrilled with it. A lot of older readers who forgot what it was like to be a 12-year-old reading superhero comics didn't like it, but we didn't care because we knew exactly who we were doing the book for and why, and it was selling through the roof to those people, you know. And it bears fruit because here you guys are in your late 30s or whatever, and you're still pathetic little fanboys about it. So that's what. Well, you didn't have to throw the word pathetic in there. Well,
Brandon did lame.
I would have taken lame.
I never say that about New Warriors fans, just X-Force fans.
Fuck yeah, New Warriors. Oh man. So then that led you, I mean, that bridged that gap between X-Force. Those guys walked out. They all, like Gabe said, they all went to Image, right? Then the editorial was like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? Obviously you were the perfect choice because you had already been scripting the books with Rob. Yeah, it was a fate. It was look, we knew that Image was happening around issues, I think we're in issues 4 or 5 of X-Force and 5 or 6 of X-Men. So it was there was absolutely the only I guess the only uncertainty was whether me and Scott were going to go to Image too. But I can't speak for Scott. They never asked me officially if I wanted to be a part of it, and I wouldn't have done it anyway because I had a 9-to-5 job at Marvel. I live in New Jersey. It was really a West Coast East Coast thing. It was a really like it was like a rap battle. Image and Marvel really kind of was a West Coast East Coast bridge divide, and
we were on the East Coast, and I worked at Marvel 9 to 5, so I didn't begrudge them what they were doing. Actually, I thought it took tremendous courage to do what they did, because they were walking away from very, very high six-figure paychecks a year to the total unknown, and it could have.
Damn, they were getting six figures back then. That's
the books were selling. The books were selling, not even counting those #1 issues that sold 8 million or 6 million. The average X-Men issue was selling 600,000-700,000 copies back then. Okay,
Gabe, what is the average issue?
Was selling 400,000 to 500,000 copies an issue for its first year, and then 300,000 to 350,000 copies an issue after that. When Chris Claremont and Jim Lee left X-Men, everybody was saying that it was going to die. We were selling 700,000 copies a month, me and Andy, when we were doing the book. The sales were phenomenal, and it was not 5 collectors buying 100,000 copies each. It wasn't that. We had a lot more readers because we had the cartoon on air, we had the toy line going. There was a tremendous buzz about the book. So there's a little bit of a speculator thing there when it came to specialty covers and all that garbage. But when it came to the month-in, month-out readers, we just had more readers. Don't forget, you guys are too young to realize there was newsstand sales too. Okay, and even as the newsstand was waning in the late 80s, early 90s, X-Men was still selling almost 200,000 copies on the newsstand alone. Okay,
and there was tons of comic book stores at the time too.
Well, the comic book stores are going to sell what they were going to sell. They're selling 300,000 to 400,000 copies of the book on a monthly basis. Add 200,000 copies on the newsstand. Add another 30,000 to 40,000 copy subscription, and you're getting 700,000 copies a month. We don't have a newsstand anymore. We killed it, and we don't have something to substitute for it. You know.
They literally were printing money. That's insane. I never thought about the sales or how much creators were making at the time, because all I saw was, well, you know, as a kid, we saw numbers as far as like what they would advertise, right? Like the #1 best-selling comic book of all time, Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man. Then it was X-Men by Jim Lee.
Then it was X-Force #1, and then 2 months later it was X-Men #1. And nothing has topped either X-Force #1 or X-Men #1. We were 6 million and 8 million, you know? And that doesn't mean that's how many copies sold through, because a lot of stores purchased multiple copies and a lot of people purchased multiple copies. But that's what's sold in. That's what's sold into stores. And those are the #1, because the direct market is a direct market. There were no returns on it, so that's what it sold. But issue #2 of X-Force sold 1.8 million or 1.6 million copies. You know,
that's crazy.
The sales were what they were. The Image guys said, look at what these books are selling, and it's because of us, and we're getting pennies on the dollar, which they were, even though those pennies amounted to 5- and 6-figure royalty checks, because Marvel had to worry about rent in New York and 50 to 75 people on staff and an accounting department and a subscription department and all of that stuff. And the Image guys said, we can do this on our own with a lot less overhead, and we can take home 95% of the profit instead of 0.15% of the profit. And their logic was sound. Their reasoning was there. And the initial sales for them really proved that to be true, because they made boatloads more money off of their Image comics than they would have off their Marvel comics, you know. But anyway,
it's just staggering.
They're out the door. They took their sweet time walking out the door. At least the guys on the X books did. And we were waiting for their final issues. What's going to be your last issue? For real? Like, are you done plotting? Are you done penciling? Is it over so that we can start with the new creative teams? And Bob knew that he wanted to hire Greg Capullo on X-Force, and he knew that he wanted to bring Andy onto X-Men. So the replacement teams were already in preparation for a little while. For a couple months there, we just didn't know what issues it was going to be. That's what leads into the Executioner song, because that crossover was on the budget. It was in the book. Yeah, that one.
Executioner song, yep.
That crossover was in the budget plan. The budget plan called for a multi-title X-Men crossover in the summer of that year, because they anticipate it's going to generate X amount of revenue into the production budget. So it's already in place when the new yearly budget is established. The Image guys knew that. They knew there was a crossover plan for the summer. They were supposed to be the architects of it until they decided to leave. and then they waited as long as they possibly could to leave. I will venture to say one of the reasons they waited that long is to try to make it as difficult as possible for us to do our jobs, so that maybe the books wouldn't be as good. Maybe the books wouldn't be as successful. It would only make them look better, and it would only enhance their image launches as well. And that's fine. That it's dirty pool, but it's pool. But it didn't make a difference because we jumped right in. We just, the minute we got the green light from Bob, I had an outline for Executioner's Song in his hand within a day or two. It broke down. I think, how many issues was it? 4 titles, 3 each, so 12 issues. Was it?
12 issues for Executioner's Song.
12 issues. Yeah, it was 4. It was 4 titles, 3 months. I remember
3
that
issues
one.
each.
And I did a layout grid on my laptop, just a box.
I hate to be that guy, but it was 16 guys. Just saying.
Was it 4 chapters, 4 books?
Yeah, it was 16.
Okay.
All right, I mean, I just remember because I've got that damn crossover. Ryley.
Actually, it's 16.
I didn't say actually, fucker. I said
on page 17 and panel 3, I distinctly remember seeing Boom Boom.
How are you gonna bust my balls? It's your shit I'm quoting.
There's only 12 issues in this collection, Omar.
Damn it! Are you sure?
Yeah, I knew I was right.
Omar, you're counting like the Stripe files and stuff. That's in there.
Okay, that's right.
Which is like the coolest book ever. Is that Stripe file?
Thank you. That was me too.
Yes.
Exhausting. My God. So I had a chart breakdown, and each box had 1 issue of the story, and we had a writers meeting. Peter David and Scott Lobdell and me and Larry Hama, and I dropped the chart on everyone's lap and said, "This is our rough breakdown. Let's fine tune it," and off we went. So Executioner's Song was really predominantly me, just because we needed to get it to happen quickly. But you notice we didn't miss a beat. We didn't miss a month, and the books didn't miss shipping. They just kept coming right on out every single month after that, and they sold really, really well. So Image Boys were happy. Marvel was happy. Everybody was happy for those couple of years.
And that was basically the start of just like the endless amount, not endless amount, but just like the back-to-back crossovers at that point as well.
Yeah,
it seemed like
that's less us and more the demands on the company's publishing program by its new owners. That's really what it amounts to. They increased our publishing budget expectations almost exponentially every year. So you couldn't meet those numbers without launching more #1s and more specialty covers and more crossovers. We went straight from Fatal Attractions right into Blood Ties and Avengers without even an issue break. And it was wearing us out, and we weren't happy about it at all. And we had discussions about it internally about how it was hurting the content, and we knew it. We all knew it, but Ron Perlman, who was the new owner of the company, I guarantee you wasn't sitting on his golden toilet while he was taking a crap worrying about whether we were comfortable doing that many crossovers or not. He wasn't worried about overexposure for Wolverine. All he was worried about is flushing more money down his golden toilet.
He didn't care that you guys are getting like pulled through thin or overworked or underappreciated or anything like that either.
No, and the company that owned us, it was really an interesting case of do not wish for you may receive, because we always wanted an owner that would try to do more with us, that would try to expand our character base, trading cards and toys and animation. And we were getting all of that happening, but the more that happened, the more they made gigantic, colossal mistakes in their financial decisions, and all of that was hurting the company and ultimately hurting the comics and ultimately hurting the industry. But it wasn't really coming from editorial out. It was really coming from out imposed onto editorial.
Ryley, you've been pretty quiet, man. We've been hugging the.
Actually, I'm a little tired of Ryley. He just won't shut up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I really am.
Have you noticed? Like this, he just won't stop talking.
I know.
He's the Deadpool of our show.
Yeah,
I really am. I just can't shut up. I don't know. I was letting these guys. I'm a decade younger than Omar, so I wasn't buying these books as they were coming out.
A
You weren't even
decade.
No, I
born when
wasn't.
these books came out.
Omar, how old are you?
40.
I'm 12 years younger than you.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
So you weren't. 1992 is what we're talking about.
So I
greatest year in
wasn't reading.
comics.
I wasn't reading, but so I have more familiarity with. I guess that means some of your later works, which in staying with what we're talking about, the big thing would be Cable and Deadpool from mid 2000s.
Good call.
That
I'm
was
glad,
a
I'm glad Ryley's
fantastic.
finally talking.
There we
Yes,
go. We got that book with me too today.
Yeah, I've got mine's up on my Deadpool shelf up here, but that was a fantastic book, and God, I read that. It was kind of when I read it, it was around the time that all the trades had already come out, and there was this weird kind of Deadpool. All of a sudden, went from being a name that people who read comics knew him, but he was starting to become kind of a more of a known presence, and a lot of it was online, and it was kind of strange. You'd see a lot of people posting screen grabs like from issues of Cable and Deadpool, just hilarious moments from that series. I think one of them I remember seeing a lot was, what did the dialogue say, that Deadpool was he looked like a mix of, was it Tom Cruise and a Sharpay or something?
Ryan Reynolds.
Ryan Reynolds. Yeah, you called that.
I called that before he got cast as Wade Wilson in the Wolverine Origins movie. And I couldn't even spell his name right because legal wouldn't allow me to. They didn't want Ryan to sue Marvel if his name was in the book.
That's what happened to me this morning with that tweet.
What?
Yeah, that's why I misspelled your name. I didn't want to get sued. That's exactly what happened.
It was a good idea. I was going to sue you. That lawyer's looking into it already. I got my three favorite writing experiences in superhero comics has basically been New Warriors, Cable and Deadpool, and Thunderbolts in that order. A really close second would have been Robin and Red Robin if they hadn't a New 52, the Red Robin series. If I'd gotten to write Tim Drake for another year or two, I think it would have cracked my top three. But Cable and Deadpool was a pleasure because it was almost a chance. It was almost like starting over again in a way. It was almost like a chance to reprove myself. I hadn't written for Marvel for 4 months before they offered me the book. They offered me the book out of as much, not desperation, but out of absolute uncertainty of what to do with these two characters, because they kind of hadn't worked out well when they did Agent X and Soldier X. After they had stopped publishing the monthly Cable and Deadpool separate books. So I got a call from Mike Martz, and he said, we want to do a book with Cable and Deadpool in it, and your name came up in a meeting because we were trying to figure out who really understands these characters, because no one in the office really has a feel for them. And your name came up, and I said, okay, great. That sounds like an interesting idea. You mean like Tales of Suspense, like where each of them get half a book, 11 pages each? And Mike goes, no, like a buddy book, like they're in it together. And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. That sounds interesting. He goes, great, thanks. Write up a pitch and give me like a 6-issue breakdown in the next few days. I said, okay, great. And I hang up, and I remember to this day, it was my old house. It wasn't this one. But I go walk into the front of the office, and I look out the window, and I go, how the hell am I going to write a book with these two guys in it every single month? They're going to want to kill each other. And I said, okay, there's 6 issues right there under the Bill Jemas rules of how to write comic books now. Under the Tom DeFalco rules, it would have been 2 issues, but under the Bill Jemas rules, it was 6 issues. And I literally, and I'm not kidding, I literally realized I had my first 6 issues right there. The 2 of them are forced into a situation where they want to kill each other, but they can't kill each other. Then let's figure it out from there. And the first 6 issues was me trying to figure out how I'm going to have these guys in the book together every single month. And I figured it out halfway through that initial arc. And the reason was because they got nobody else. They're both really lonely people. That's it. So hook on that theme and stick to that theme as the underlying structure for the book. These are 2 incredibly lonely people all they have is each other, and isn't that pathetic? Right? And that was the through line. That was the thematic through line for the entire book. So whether it was a Cable-centric story where he becomes god of all he surveys, or he becomes the president of a country, or whether it was a Deadpool-centric story, that was the underlying theme that was going on in the book. And you know, we were able to whip the horse for 50 issues, right? It rode okay. It never sold, but its sales never, ever went below any level. I mean, it stuck like, it was like this. It was flatline, and then I would do a crossover and it would go up enough, just enough that we'd be able to survive for another 6 issues. We were on 6-month cancellation notices every 6 months for the first 3 years, I think. And then when we didn't think there was going to be any more cancellation notices, that's when they decided to take Cable out of the book. So that's when I knew we were going to be canceled. But for a long time, it was like I was writing 6-issue arcs thinking that it was going to be the last one every time, because the book was selling about 35,000 copies. I'd get it to bump up to 40 or 42 if we did a crossover during Civil War and stuff like that. And then it would drop down a couple thousand again after that. But those blips in your publishing program help you survive, because it increases your sales enough that it amortizes itself over several issues. So over several issues, a 5,000 or 6,000 increase bumps it up so that each individual issue looks a little better as a result, money-wise. And when your margins are that fine, like Marvel's have been for so long and DC's have been for so long, you look for whatever you can get to justify continuing your book. You know, the book sales were never great, but I saw something happening with Deadpool, and it's exactly what you said, Ryan. It happened on social media. It didn't happen in a comic book. I saw more and more women writing letters. I was doing the letters pages in the Cable Deadpool book. I wrote those.
That was you?
Yeah, I wasn't going to let anyone else do a letters page. If Deadpool's answering the letters,
that makes sense. That's awesome.
I did the intro pages the way I did because I refused to accept the Marvel edict that you had to have a story so far intro that was boring typeset pages, because the 9-year-old in me would cry at that. So I asked, can I at least have a couple floating heads and I'll have word balloons describe what happened? And the minute they said yes, I knew I was golden, because then I can have Deadpool describe what happened the month before, and it would be ridiculous, you know, because it would be Deadpool's perception of what happened the month before. And then I closed out the book with the letters pages, and I saw the letters we were getting was more and more people who weren't that familiar with comics, more and more women. Then I started to see all the social media stuff happening. You get a YouTube cosplay video that had 50, 60,000 hits of a guy dancing around at a convention in 2011, right? And you go, wow, that's more than we're even selling. That same video is at 10 million hits a few years later, right? And that means, well, you gotta be really honest with yourself. We're not selling 10 million comics, so someone is looking at this who is not looking at the comic, and that someone was especially teenagers who are going to YouTube and going online for their entertainment, and that's how they were becoming familiar with Deadpool. And the comic was almost secondary. So I knew that the character's visibility comic-wise was going to increase, because I already saw his visibility increasing externally. There were licensing and merchandising stuff all over Spencer gift stores and Hot Topic stores. You know, that creates its own vibe. My kid came home from middle school in 8th grade and goes, you know a character named Deadpool? And I go, yeah, I know a character named Deadpool. Is like 2010 or so. I go, yeah, I know a character. I finished Cable Deadpool in 2008. And I go, why? He goes, oh, a couple kids at school were talking about it during lunch. There's like a video game coming out. They said he's really funny and he used to be a comic book character. So I wanted to know if you knew who he was. I go, yeah, I know who he is. And my son starts walking out of the room. I go, do you want to know how I know who he is? He goes, nah, I don't care. He didn't care. 3 weeks later, he comes home. He goes, why didn't you tell me that you were co-creator? I go, you didn't. I asked you. You didn't care. I said, how do you know? My friends looked it up on Wikipedia because they really thought the character was funny in the video game. So they looked up on Wikipedia, and then because my last name's not exactly a common one, they asked
or easy to spell.
Yeah, or how to spell. Yeah, they asked my son, is the same last name as your last name. This was at lunch. I was like, what? So that's how he found out that I co-created Deadpool.
And now you're totally cool to your son.
Starting to happen. What?
Now you're the cool dad to your son and his friends. Where before nobody cared.
To the friends, yes, always. Ever to my kids. So the social media is really what elevated the character, and all the merchandising that was happening, and all of that stuff was really about the character's personality and the character's humor and the character's attitude, far more than anything necessarily that was happening in comics. The comics actually benefited a bit from that because the Deadpool run after me had increased in sales from 30,000 copies to 40,000 or 45,000 copies. Then the Deadpool run after Daniel Way's, the Dugan Posehn run, had increased to 60,000 copies. It's fantastic that book sales could double in 10 years like that. A character's book sales can do that. It's testament to how many more people became familiar with the character. And the Cable and Deadpool trade paperbacks still sell like crazy now to this day. Every time they reprint them, they sell a truckload of them. I don't know why they don't print a freaking boatload more.
I don't know why they don't reprint this right here.
Yeah, I got a copy of that too. Luckily, they sent me one of those.
It's out of print, and people want to purchase this, and it's crazy, right? Because this is a $125 book, retail, but at In-Stock Trades when it did come out.
Well, they just reprinted the trades.
The Ultimate Collections, but
Ultimate Collection.
Yeah. But I just got a royalty check on those, so I realized they had done reprints on them.
So you do get a royalty check for anything that has Deadpool being reprinted. Then that's good.
You get trade royalties, and you get digital royalty or digital incentives for digital comic sales on everything. So
that's awesome.
If I have one issue in a Wolverine collection, which I just had recently because I did an inventory story with Derek Robertson that they reprinted, I got like a $20 check. You know what I mean? If I wrote the whole thing, it's going to be more of a check because they amortize it based on how many pages you have in the compilation.
So you don't the collections departments are the ones that make the decisions with these books, right? They're like,
I believe so. That's different than my time at Marvel.
Do they let you know though, like, hey, Mr. NIcieza or Fabian, whatever they call you, we're gonna reprint New Warriors?
They don't call me at all, Omar. They don't call me anything because they don't call me at all. They don't tell you that they're gonna be reprinting a book. I find out when I open up a FedEx package and there's a book of mine. Oh, they did this? I didn't know that. I don't follow it. I could follow it a lot more closely. I could look at the freaking catalog every month and see what they're doing, but I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Because there is a high demand from me and a lot of us for a New Warriors Omnibus Volume 2.
Yeah, I think they would do it if the first one sold enough. Maybe the first one didn't sell enough.
Well, it's out of print now, so maybe.
Well, they did the first one because I think of the TV show announcement, and the TV show's in limbo. So I don't think they're going to do a second one. They'll also do it. They'll also do it if they need to replenish the trademark. If they need to perpetuate the trademark, that's why you'll see a new miniseries get done, or that's why you'll see a new trade paperback or a hardcover come out because they got to replenish the trademark. And I don't know that they need to on New Warriors because they just did the Chris Yost series a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago. Shit, they could put Deadpool on the cover and sell it as Deadpool and the New Warriors, and me and Gabe will buy it.
That's a fact. I'm sorry to hear that.
They did that with the X-Force book.
They did that with X-Force.
Yeah, I know. I also noticed that the new Ultimate collections are no longer called Cable and Deadpool. They're now called Deadpool and Cable.
Yeah, the Omnibus is also Deadpool and Cable, but we all know the damn truth.
No, when Ryley and I did our split second story, it was a digital story first, but then they reprinted it in a miniseries called Deadpool and Cable. And we actually had a joke that Deadpool says, he's finally on top because he deserves to be. So there you go.
That was recently collected in one of those Deadpool classics too.
Yeah,
so it's available as a 3-issue miniseries, then the trade paperback, and then
I do like that. That they're reprinting so much Deadpool stuff that a book that just came out about 3 years ago is already in a classic volume.
Oh, they love that. They know how to milk that cash cow for sure. Oh, everything that has Deadpool, and I think Ryley, you probably have every single one of their Omnis, don't you?
The Daniel Way stuff, right? Right, Ryley?
Yeah, I've got it all. If I can, let's see. Yeah, so I've got all those books.
Ryan likes his Deadpool.
I mean, like because I'm like, all right, well, I love Cable and Deadpool, and I love the Joe Kelly run, and then it's like they keep popping out with them, and I'm like, well, I might as well just fill the gaps and get all the other stuff.
But do you have the actual original comics, or you just get the books?
I have the issues for Daniel Way's run, for a lot of the stuff that Victor Gischler was doing during that time, and I had the single issues for the beginning, at least, of Posehn and Dugan's run. But I usually upgrade those, so to say, into the hardcovers just for archival purposes.
I understand. That is good.
So me and Ryley can also talk about something else that we like that Fabian, you mentioned, was one of your favorite work experiences. It's Thunderbolts, which is another book that needs to be reprinted into like a hardcover.
That needs to be an omnibus.
Yeah,
they haven't even completely collected that your run on that.
No, right. they got. I know that they did a trade paperback called Hawkeye and the Thunderbolts or something.
They did 2 of those volumes.
Yeah,
and then they stopped because you wrote all the way up to issue 75 before I went to that crappy Fight Club shit.
And then
they stopped at issue 50
to do the miniseries, and then I did another 25 issues of the new Thunderbolts stuff, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, because issue 100 is when Genis Vell died, so I remember that because he was one of my favorite characters. But yeah, tell us about that time, because Thunderbolts is definitely one of my favorite books of all time. I recently sold my 30 years worth of single collections or single issues for personal reasons, and one of the things I kept though was my entire run of Thunderbolts. So I would love to hear your experience.
Having just gone through that myself a few years ago, where I got rid of half of my collection, it's I appreciate being a part of what you kept.
No, definitely. Yeah, thank you for being a part of that.
What you're going to get rid of. So basically, I got a call from Tom Brevoort, and he said, Kurt's leaving the book, and I want you to write it. And I said, great, I love the book. It's a great book. I do say that I think Kurt's losing a little steam in the last 6-8 months. But I still think the characters are fantastic, and there's a lot of there's enough dangling subplots that we can easily flow into a transition between him and me. I've never been the kind of writer who comes in and says nothing ever existed before me, or I'm going to ignore everything that was done before me, or this is going to be my way or the highway. I've never been that kind of a writer ever. I really am from the Grunwald school of maintaining respect and continuity. So the fact that you like the work helps, obviously, in that case. I really liked Kurt's work. So and Mark was going to keep drawing it. Tom said, yeah, he's probably going to keep drawing it to issue 50. He wants to stick around a little bit longer. And because you're working on it, he's really excited to work with you again. So I said, great. Okay. Boom, off we went. That was it. It was that simple. I handed in my first plot, and we just went. And I think the transition was so smooth that for the first 6 issues at least, more than half the letters were addressed to Kurt and Mark. They didn't even know that there was a new writer. And I took no offense to that whatsoever. I don't think Kurt and I have the same writing style at all. But the readers felt they were still getting the same Thunderbolts, and that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. So I just kept going with the book. It was a fun book to do because I was encouraged by my editor to have fun with the Marvel Universe sandbox. Not enough writers were back then, and I had a good time doing that. I probably got a little too cute with my deaths and my resurrections, and I probably got a little too overstuffed. It's like when you put too much into a burrito shell and you think you're going to be able to roll it up and you just can't get it to roll up properly. I might have put a little too much stuff into the book so that it started to get a little weighed down, I think. after issue 50. But that's my fault, nobody else's. Patrick Zerker took over as the artist, and he was fantastic to work with also. It was just a really good, fun run. The book sales were solid all the way through. I was just a victim of new editor-itis, a new editor coming in who wanted to do something different, and that was Fight Club. So I got fired for Fight Bolts. The fact that it lasted 6 issues was something that made me very, very happy. So when they asked me and Kurt to bring them back in a miniseries, it's because a lot of fans were not happy with what they had done with Thunderbolts. What happens a lot editorially is that they fail to respect the characters they have and underestimate the respect the audience has for those characters. It happens time and time again, and it's always happened in our industry, where editors won't respect the characters they have because they're always looking for something shiny and new. And Thunderbolts was one of those things that after 60, 70 issues, it's not shiny and new anymore. It's a little bogged down by its own weight, but that's an outsider looking at it from the outside. You know, the insiders who are reading it like it for those reasons. So when you cancel a book or when you change its premise entirely, you really better do it smartly and well. Fight Bolts wasn't smart and it wasn't good. For example, the right way to do it was the second time I got fired off Thunderbolts, which was when Warren Ellis took over. That was the right way to do it because it still had a smell of the DNA of the original book, just enough of a hint of the DNA that you could tie it to the regular book. And it had Warren Ellis and Mike Deodato, who are just cool as shit creators, you know? So that was a successful way. I didn't even mind getting fired the second time because I thought that I've done a long run. I've done 75 issues of this book. It's okay that I get fired and someone else take over. And if it's going to be someone taking over, it might as well be somebody really cool like Warren and Mike. So I was okay with that part of it.
It seems like as you have written these things, you are in it for such a long game. Like you have all these ideas that you set across, like not just in X-Men and X-Force, but like Thunderbolts. Like you like you said yourself, you did 75 issues. And then when somebody else, like for that same reason, unfortunately, you get cut, somebody else comes in and they last maybe a year or two. And then all these plot threads go away that you built up because you never got to see the end of that. Is that the way that you mentally, like, when you write out a story, you're just like, okay, if this lasts 50 issues, this is where it's going to go? Is that how you
I used to do that a lot more. I stopped doing that after Thunderbolts, actually, because I saw that there was no need for that anymore. That's not how the editors were operating anymore. That's not how the industry was operating anymore. If you got 12 issues, you were lucky. So why plan for 24? You know, it makes no sense to create a 2-year arc in your head if you're not even going to get 2 years. In the old days, you can do that because you had confidence that if your book was going to succeed, it was going to succeed continuously for a few years. I had New Warriors thought through issue 100. When I left with issue 53, but I could have told you what was going to happen in issue 75, and I could have told you what was going to happen in issue 100, because I knew in my head the benchmarks for what I wanted to do, and they were always 12-issue to 25-issue arcs, you know?
Did that have something to do with you writing so many books at the time? Because, I mean, you were on Nova, Night Thrasher, X-Men, X-Force, New Warriors, like all these books that you were just cranking out at the time. Were you just needed a break from something?
Yeah, well, I was writing too much, and I also had a full-time job too. Don't forget, because I went from being an advertising manager to being an editor, and I was editing licensed books like Ren and Stimpy and Bill and Ted,
that's right, yeah,
and Barbie and all of that. So I was Marvel's main presentation guy. So I was doing distributor meeting presentations and licensing show presentations and all this other stuff. So I was definitely burning out, no doubt about it. Ironically, Bob Harris said to me, "You're writing too many books. The quality is suffering. You're going to have to quit some books." And he thought that I was going to walk in and quit the New Warriors books. And the next day I came in and I quit cable. So he wasn't that happy about it. I quit Nova and Night Thrasher because I wasn't going to be able to enjoy writing them as solo characters the way I wanted to. I wasn't happy with Night Thrasher because we were playing musical artists, so I didn't feel a real comfort zone with that character in a monthly book.
That was music that took after you, right? On Night Thrasher.
I think Kurt took over. I never read what comes after me. It took me over 10 years to read Evan Skolnick's run of New Warriors, and he's one of my best friends.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
He would bug me all the time. Have you read it yet? Have you read it yet? He stopped asking, and then finally at one point go, Evan, I read it. And he goes, are you kidding me? And it was like at least 10 years later. I just don't, I'm not interested. I don't want to know. I never read a single issue of the Daniel Way run of Deadpool. I have no idea what he ever did.
You're not missing out on anything.
Well, that's interesting because we had Eric Larson on last week, and he said the same thing. He's never read Spider-Man or Venom or anything like that after he left. It seems to be a creator thing that you just don't go back to.
Maybe other people do read it. I just, to me, it was a no-win situation. I still feel that way. If I read it and it's good, then I'm jealous that it's good or better than what I was doing. If I read it and it's bad, then I'm angry that it's bad and I'm not still doing it. So why read it at all then? Why bother, So I just don't bother. I'll read Deadpool stuff if I'm asked to write something that is Deadpool related, then I'll read it. But I don't read regular Deadpool stuff. I don't want to know, So it wasn't, it wasn't worth it to me. So anyway, where were we? Yeah, I was doing too much work and I wasn't happy. And I got to a point with New Warriors. The reason I quit wasn't because I didn't like the characters. I just got to a point where I was putting far more effort and energy into promoting and trying to sell the book than the company was. I went to a San Diego Comic-Con and I spent my own money to print T-shirts and ash cans for New Warriors and all this stuff because the company was doing nothing. And I said, you know what? This is ridiculous. I'm a freaking freelance writer on a work-for-hire book. Why am I spending my own money to promote it? This is absurd. If I'm investing more energy into a comic book than the company is investing into that comic book, then I don't know that I should keep writing that comic book anymore. And I also wasn't happy with the editor's choice for the new artist. I did not want to work with that artist over an extended period of time. I didn't think that the art style was simpatico. Ironically enough, that artist didn't last. And if Patrick Zerker had been the guy that had been assigned it after Derek, I might have stayed a while longer because I always liked Patrick's work from the very beginning. I saw real potential in him, which was clearly borne out, obviously.
Yeah, that guy's blown up.
Yeah, so that's why I quit New Warriors. It was just a time in my life. I was having my first kid. I'd made a lot of money. I wasn't happy with the work I was doing. I thought the quality of the work wasn't good. I was devolving or degressing, not evolving or progressing. And I just wanted a bit of a break. So I went from 6 monthly titles in 92 or 93 or 4 to 0 monthly titles in 95.
So that was the first time you broke my heart, Fabian.
Captain Marvel was my last monthly title. That 6-issue run was my last monthly title for Marvel at that point.
So, I don't know. I really don't know this story. But when you were writing X-Men and X-Force, it was during that Age of Apocalypse crossover. All I know is I came into my comic book store to pick up issue 4 of a certain issue, and your name was not on the title. And then when everything came back to normal, you were no longer writing X-Men.
X-Force. I was fired off X-Force while Age of Apocalypse was happening.
Right. So that final issue of like Gambit and the Externals and things like that.
I wrote it, but I asked for my name to be taken off it.
Okay.
Because I wasn't happy with the rewrites that the editor was doing on it, and I wasn't happy with the changes that had to be made because they were figuring the story out as they were going along. And I had a lot of problems during Age of Apocalypse, and it exacerbated my understanding that my time on those books was coming to an end.
So then you were let go of X-Men as well? They were
I quit X-Men, but that was a few issues later. I wrote X-Men to issue 45, and I think it came out of Age of Apocalypse like issue 30. What issue did it come out of? 42 or something. So I wrote X-Men for a few more issues after Age of Apocalypse, but I was fired off X-Force in the middle of Age of Apocalypse. So I was not asked to come back to X-Force while Age of Apocalypse was happening, and that was Gambit and the Externals.
Gambit and Externals, yeah. Because I remember, I just remember that was the second time you broke my heart. It's when
I
you
didn't do
left
that.
X-Men.
You can't blame the writer who gets fired for breaking your heart.
Well, X-Men, well, I didn't know. I was a kid at the time. I just assumed writers were just these magical gods that, could go and I'm done writing X-Men. I think I'm going to go write Justice League now. I thought things like that were happening behind the scenes.
Well, and those things do happen behind the scenes. I mean, I quit X-Men. I quit Cable. I quit Alpha Flight years earlier. I quit New Warriors. I quit Nova. I quit Night Thrasher. You leave books. Either you get fired or you quit or it gets canceled. Those are the only three ways that you can really not work on a book anymore, right?
Right.
You either write it forever, or it gets canceled, or you quit, or you get fired. So if those are your only options, then the odds are pretty good that you're going to statistically fall under one of those categories, no matter what reason you leave a book. So I got fired off X-Force. I never was given a reason, and I never asked for one. The book was still in the top 10 at the time that I got fired. And that was it. And I knew I was going to leave X-Men, but quite frankly, I wanted to stretch it out a few more months because they were good royalty checks. And I wanted to milk a little more money from the company, and I really did want to finish trying to tell a little bit of the Gambit Rogue story. And I knew that issue 45 was going to be that. So I knew that was a good issue to be my last issue.
It was a great cover on that issue too. I remember Randy Cooper drawing that.
Yeah.
So from that moment that you left, you went over you started writing some stuff for DC.
I was doing a little bit for DC and Marvel. That was 95. And Steve Masarski had asked me to come to Valiant to work at Acclaim, and I said no because he couldn't offer me the editor-in-chief title. He wanted to offer me the workload and the responsibility without offering me the title. And Bob Layton was still going to be there, just sort of hanging, and I wasn't going to walk into that kind of situation. So I said, if Bob leaves and you're still interested, give me a call and we'll talk. And 10 months later, he called me and said, Bob's leaving, and I still want you to come over. And I said, okay, fine, because I wanted that experience. I wanted that opportunity to try to run a company, to try to run an editorial division of a company. In hindsight, an experience, I would have learned a lot more in advance of saying yes, and I probably would have said no. But at the time, it was something I wanted to do because I really honestly thought that I was going to have that opportunity at Marvel. And when it didn't happen, that was when I said, time to walk away and try to figure some other things out. I'm only 35 at that time, so I really want to try to figure new stuff out. My life's not over yet. I got to figure new stuff out for myself. So I thought running a company would be a good opportunity for me to learn. And I did. I learned a tremendous amount. It just was a fatally flawed company before I even took it over. And I kept it treading water for a couple of years until I couldn't pretend any longer. And I went to the parent company. I said, here, this is the reality. We're not going to fudge the budgets anymore. We're not going to lie anymore. This is what it is. This is the reality. And the only way out of this reality is to do X, Y, and Z. And that was literally to fire, lay off 3/4 of the staff and reduce the publishing workload to a minimal amount of titles, and get out of the New York offices so that you're not spending that kind of money on the rent and the overhead. And that's what we did. I laid off 23 out of 30 people and closed the company down and moved it out to Glen Cove, Long Island, where the parent company was. And a few people came over, and I went too, but I knew I was going to be leaving. I was out of there by 4 months. 4 months later, that was 98. That was summer of 98, because I walked out the door of Glen Cove on a Friday without any idea what I was going to do next. Zero. I hadn't even planned or thought about it. I was just out. I was done. And it was really stressful to have to do all of that stuff. I did it for the right professional reasons, but it was still stressful because I became friends with everybody. We had a really good work environment. We just couldn't sell our damn books. So I walked out the door on a Friday, and on a Monday, Mark Powers calls me up and says, we want to do a new Gambit monthly book, and I want you to write it. And I said, okay, I guess I'm a freelance writer again. I didn't even give myself a chance to take some time and figure out what to do. I just jumped back into being a freelance writer again. So
this was after Acclaim, after you left the...
Yeah. August of '98. I walked out the door on a Friday. On a Monday, Mark offered me Gambit. So I started writing for Marvel and DC because there was no contracts back then. Joey Cavalieri called me up and offered me a miniseries at DC. So I just started to write a little here and there for everybody. And I was writing Gambit monthly when Tom called me to offer me Thunderbolts. So there I got 2 monthly books. And, you know, I started to do new stuff around 2001 in terms of non-comic stuff. That's when my non-comics career started to happen. And from 2001 to this day, I still devote more than 60% of my time to non-comic stuff. I've worked with a company in New York for 15 years, freelance, doing intellectual property management for Hollywood studios and video game companies and toy companies and governments and charitable foundations and retail brands and everything and anything that's interesting. And I've been doing that since 2001, 2002.
I had no idea you were doing that stuff.
That's
awesome.
We created the Hot Wheels World Race concept and characters. We worked on Pirates of the Caribbean. We worked on James Cameron's Avatar, on Men in Black, on Spider-Man, on Halo, on Transformers. We do these pretty elaborate brand narrative explanations and mythologies. These mythology encyclopedias. They're basically glorified versions of brand narrative for marketing and DK encyclopedias. DK Books does those great encyclopedias. It's a combination of those two things. Do them for big time clients, you know, all the time. And I do that. I do a lot of that because it's just interesting work. I'm freaking on set of Avatar when they're doing motion capture stuff 2-3 years before the movie even came out, and I'm on set with James Cameron yelling at a poor production assistant. It's kind of cool.
Oh, that's pretty badass.
Yeah.
That's more than really cool. That's really badass.
I go to Queens. And Will Smith walks out and he's wearing his Men in Black suit and he says, "Hey guys, how you doing?" Because we just seen him a couple months before in California, and he's wearing his full Men in Black suit. And you're like, son of a bitch! It's Agent J. So, you know, that's fun stuff to do because it breaks up the monotony of doing the same thing. You get to do different things, you know? And sometimes it becomes its own level of monotony, so I like to break it up by doing something else, you know? Freelancer's life is like a leaky roof, and you got to put lots of buckets on the floor to collect the water, and you got to hope that each bucket gets a certain amount of water every year, you know? And okay, I got 4 buckets, and 2 of them are filled, and 2 of them are half filled. Okay, I had a decent year. You know, if all 4 buckets are filled, you had a great year, and if only 2 of the buckets are filled, your year wasn't that good. And that's what freelance is like every single year, you know?
So these days, where can people find you? I know you just, like you said, about 3 years ago, you did that Cable and Deadpool miniseries.
Yeah, I do a lot of custom comics work for DC and Marvel, a lot more for Marvel. It's the kind of stuff you don't see that often, but the editor and I have known each other for years, and he knows that I can handle this kind of stuff because you got to always juggle a lot of client needs. So, like, I just did a Hulk versus Thor 16-page comic for the New York Jets, and also a digital history of the New York Jets because it's their 50th anniversary. So they're going to be giving away the comic at a football game, and they're going to have the digital history of the New York Jets online. I just did that like a month ago for Marvel. So you don't see it that often, but I do it. I did an 80-page graphic novel for Marvel Custom Comics for a pharmaceutical company with a brand new superhero team called the Unbeatables, and it's all new characters and this whole new story, and no one's on the planet's going to see it other than the people that are involved with the pharmaceutical company and the clients they give it to. And that's all right, because at this point in my career, I don't care about that stuff. You know, I have a backup story in the Domino Annual, which is looking kind of cool because it's got a lot of really good people working on it. I have a Cable and Deadpool story in the Domino Annual, which I think comes out in September. And I'm really happy with that story. If you're a Cable fan, you should read the story because it's kind of an interesting look at the character. It kind of defines that sadness and loneliness I was talking about earlier.
I'm going to go into my diamond orders and bump up that annual for the store. Definitely.
Leah Williams is writing a story, and Gail's writing a lead story. It looks really interesting. The backup stories all take a different character relationship Domino has had. Mine is Cable, but mine's not really a Domino story. Mine's really a Cable story. It wouldn't exist without Domino, but it's really a Cable story. I was really happy with how that came out. I just did that over the summer, but it's a 5-page story, so you know. My main thing comic-wise that I've been working on for the last year is a new digital comic coming out on Webtoon, which is a digital publisher. You download the app for free for your iPad, your iPhone, your Android, or you go online on webtoon.com. And they're a Korean publisher, and they have comics from all over the planet, creators from all over the world, and all different kinds of genres. Their main audience predominantly has been females, and their main comics are directed toward females. They want to do more in the North American market, so they came scouting people at New York Comic Con a couple of years ago, and Ryley and I had been doing the digital Cable Deadpool comic, and they were aware of Ryley's experience with digital comic storytelling. So they asked him if he wanted to do something, and they asked me if I wanted to do something. And Ryley said, "Babe and I are going to want to do something together. He's had an idea for a while that's really good." And it's the truth. I had an idea for a while, and I was just being too damn lazy to do it. And Ryley really liked it and always wanted to do it. And I was just like, yeah, all right, I'll get to it. It's a lot of work having to write this stuff. I'm an old man now. So it's called Outrage. It starts next Wednesday, September 12th. The first 3 chapters drop. The digital comics are a vertical scroll, not a horizontal scroll. Look at me on my phone. I'm doing this instead of this, okay? And most of the Marvel Comics digital stuff that we've done have been horizontal scrolls, so it was a bit of a learning curve. But the way that Webtoon does their stories, it's the panels are the equivalent roughly of 5 pages worth of material per chapter, okay? So it's about 30 panels per chapter, and a chapter comes out once a week. And our story is 26 chapters long. So it's a chunk. It's a 130-page story. It's not a tiny little thing. It's a project. Next Wednesday, the first 3 chapters will drop online, and then every week thereafter, a chapter will come out. The premise is so incredibly simple that I'm stunned that nobody came up with it before, to my knowledge. And I'm stunned that no one had trademarked the name Outrage. I got the trademark on the name. Ryley and I got the trademark on the name Outrage, which was mind-boggling to me. Basically, Outrage is a bully who bullies the bullies on the internet. Okay? So if Omar right now is text messaging some woman and she has no interest in what he has to say, but he won't stop.
Never gonna happen.
He's getting worse and worse and looter. And then let's say all of a sudden Omar decides, you know what she really wants? She really wants a dick pic. That's what she really wants. I'm going to take a picture. Sure. All of a sudden, Omar's laptop is going to start sparking, no pun intended, or his phone is going to start sparking, and out of those digital bytes, Outrage is going to coalesce and form itself and smack the living shit out of Omar. That
doesn't seem too out of the contrary. That sounds like Omar already.
That's basically what Outrage does. If you're being an ass on the internet, Outrage will find you and will punish you for it, and often do so in a rather comedic manner and in a rather loud, obnoxious manner. The way I've tried to describe him, because there's a humor sensibility that is not going to. It's not going to be altered that much because it's coming out of my brain. So there's a bit of a Deadpool humor sensibility to it. But the difference to me as I've been writing it is that Deadpool is your id. and outrage is your super ego. So Deadpool's humor comes out of his misanthropic loneliness and his tragedy and his sadness and his feeling that he doesn't belong in society. Outrage's humor comes out of his sense of superiority and that he or she is smarter than you and knows more than you, and you deserve to be punished for being an idiot. So there's a different approach to the comedy in it. But the entire story is predicated on two things. The first half of the project is who is outrage, because the FBI is trying to find out what the heck this thing is, because it's happening all over the world. It's happening multiple times in one night sometimes. People's devices are getting frozen with an emoji, I call it, an outrage emoji face on it. So people are complaining that their devices are getting frozen by this thing. And the FBI wants to know what's going on. So the first half of the book is trying to find out who outrage is. The second half of the book is why does outrage exist? And that to me is the thematic part of it, is why are we all doing this on the internet? Why are we acting this way? What is wrong with us that makes us want to interact in this fashion? And that's the second half of the book, is going to explore those aspects of it and our social media interaction a little bit more.
How soon does
a lot of nut kicking and a lot of slapping with noodles, so it's all good.
Oh, you had me at Omar dick pic, so I'm
yeah, there you go. Why am I not surprised that Omar had himself at his own dick pics?
Where were you 2 weeks ago, outrage, when Omar sent me butthole pictures?
I heard about Omar by then. Was that Omar that did that? I thought it was.
That was Omar. It was
It's hard to tell.
So, at what point in the outrage
identify whether it's somebody's butthole or not? I would not want to be the cop having to do that job. That is not an episode of SUV you're going to be you're going to be seeing anytime soon.
You got butthole fingerprints at the station.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when in outrage are we going to get some kind of like Comic Gate parody, or like I don't know what you think? Is that a real thing?
No, I'm not. I go after a lot of targets, but they're higher level targets. They're more. It's not about comics. It's about people in media and people in positions of power. So I'm going after that a little bit more. I'm not going to bother with comic book stuff because there'd be no correlation. There's not much of a relationship between what I'm doing in the story and that part of what's happening in the comic world. You know, I also don't want to give them more oxygen than they deserve. Quite frankly, they would consider it a badge of honor if outrage smacked the crap out of it. So I'm going to be touching on what leads to things like Comicsgate and Gamergate, but I'm not going to be commenting on those things specifically.
Right. Okay. Good. Yeah, like you said, we don't want to give those guys any more spotlight than they already are getting. But yeah, something. But I think just that mentality that's been creeping up a lot more on social media is perfect for this kind of story.
It's getting worse and worse, and it's probably going to be. It's either the rubber band's going to snap, and the next generation is either going to be a lot cooler about their social media interactions, or it's only going to get worse. I honestly don't know which it is. But we are now a generation of people that feel so entitled to be validated and have your personal opinion count and matter, that we're incapable of having communications with each other because everybody's way too busy having a communications with themselves. It's verbal masturbation is what social media has become. And I'm definitely going to talk about that stuff. I'm definitely going to talk about what leads people to think that this is the right way to communicate, and what leads people to think that what they have to say matters all that much. You know, it really, really doesn't. You know, I don't care if you have 100,000 followers on Twitter or 5 followers on Twitter. Ultimately, what you have to say as an individual doesn't matter any more or less than what someone else has to say as an individual. So why fight for your right to have your voice be heard as much as some of these people do? You know?
No, that's a wonderful premise, man. Yeah, so we'll link to that in the description here. And
Webtoon.com. Here's
Webtoon.com.
Here's the pitch. It's free to download the app. It's free to subscribe to the site. It's free to read all the comics on the site. So why the hell are you complaining about the cost? That's it. Okay?
Perfect.
Oh,
Get on
yeah.
that, everybody. Don't be dicks. Don't be dicks.
That's the subhead. That's a secondary tag.
Yeah, that's what.
Outrage by Fabian NIcieza and Ryley Brown. Don't be dicks. There you go.
I can't wait to see Ryley Brown's work on that. That guy's got
It's really good. Ryley's
perfect
stuff
art for that. Yeah.
Jay Leaston is inking them. Jeremy Freeman chips in a little bit. Pat Brosseau, who is a letterer I've known and worked with for 30 years, he's lettering the project. And the colorist is Matt Herms, who's done a lot of Archie and Sonic the Hedgehog stuff.
Yeah.
Matt's coloring is fantastic because unlike 90% of the colorists I see today, Matt understands that comic books require a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. So you can actually tell what's happening in the artwork when Matt is coloring it. And I got to be honest with you, I can't say that about 90% of the colorists who work for Marvel and DC nowadays.
I love his work on Sonic. That Sonic stuff is great too.
Yeah, I'm glad you're familiar with him. He's done a great job on it. The project looks really good. I am by far the weakest link in the chain, and that's okay with me, because I'm taking less money than the other guys are. So it all works out just fine. But Webtoon's been a great publisher to work with. They're launching a lot of really cool new stuff this fall. A new project with Warren Ellis, a new project and Colleen Doran, a new project with Stan Lee. And they've had some good stuff too from Sanford Green and Ryan Benjamin. Dean Haspel has been doing a project for them for over a year now. They're really, really cool about letting us tell our stories and just helping guide us in understanding how to navigate the storytelling for the platform. It is very different to have to tell 5-page chapters, and tell it in a panel scroll versus a regular comic book page. And they've been really good at helping navigate through that. But they're letting us do what we want to do, which is fantastic. It's creator-owned material, but they're still a publisher that's financially engaged in the content, so they have a responsibility to it as well.
So you said Stan Lee?
Yeah, I think they have a Stan Lee project that they were developing. I don't know who else is working on it with Stan. Stan still, I worked with Stan on an animation project a year ago. Him and he freaking edited my script and made me rewrite stuff and came up with better jokes than I had. It really pissed me off. And look, Stan at his age, and I just went through it with my mom who passed away a few months ago at 97. When you're that age, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And some days you're clicking and you're on. And I guarantee you, I did a signing with Stan a year ago at San Diego Comic-Con. So even a year later, he may have suffered a little more since then because of his age, but there's going to be days when he's on. And on the days he's on, guys, he's Stan Lee. There's no doubt about it. And on the days he's not on, he's an elderly man. And it's going to happen. It's a reality of life. But I dealt with him several times on 2 different projects a year ago. And there were some days where he just wasn't there, and there were other days where he was 100% on target. I did a hardcover book my brother published called God Woke.
Yeah.
Diamond won't carry it. Diamond has refused to carry it. It's actually a really good book and a really good project. Stan wrote a poem in the 70s, and my brother wanted to take that poem and turn it into a graphic novel. So I plotted and broke down the script for the whole thing, but it's Stan's poem. And I got to be honest, the project came out far better than I ever expected it was gonna. My brother's a tiny little small publisher that does a couple things here and there, but the book itself looks great. He sold it at conventions, and he's at the break-even making profit point now, just selling it the way he sold it. But it was really good, and I got to work with Stan a few times because he had a real emotional investment in this poem that he wrote. And then I worked with him on an animation project. A company had the rights to something that he had tried to develop for the Hub, and they had the assets, and they wanted to try to turn it into interstitial comedy bits. So I had to take pre-existing material and turn it into completely different little interstitial comedy bits. So we did about 5 2-minute videos out of pre-existing material, but Stan had to get approval and clearance on everything. So he was engaged and involved in all of that, and it was a lot of fun actually, because I knew and worked with Stan several times 25, 30 years ago, but it was kind of nice to get the chance to do it again when, you know, when he's so late in life and I'm frankly so late in my career, you know.
Wow, that's excellent. Wow, man, there's so much going on with you right now. That's great, Fabian. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
As we start to wrap this up, like, do you have any words to anybody trying to break it into comics? Any words of wisdom? Any little hints they could take? Like any writers? Okay, so here's the thing. With a writer, I'm sure it's a lot harder to break into comics than it is for an artist, right?
Yeah,
like an artist has deviant art nowadays and go to conventions. Hey, here's my art. But it is so hard to get somebody to be like, hey, read this 64-page script. Please, it's really good. It's about Cable and Deadpool. Like, how do you
always been harder. It's always been harder for writers to break in, but you have to define the first thing I've always said when someone asks me a question about breaking into comics. I always ask, what do you mean by that for yourself? Because if you mean breaking in by writing a story for Marvel or DC versus breaking in by getting a chance to produce comic book work, those are two completely different things. Okay. If you want to break in as a writer for Marvel or DC, the words of wisdom I heard John Romita tell someone at a convention one time that I listened and absorbed and never let go of is there are 6 doors to break in to Marvel or DC, okay? You have to be on staff and get to sell your writing from the staff position. You have to know someone who is on staff and get them to look at your writing or sell your writing in-house. You have to be an artist who decides they want to try to write and convinces an editor that they can do their writing. You have to know an artist and convince that artist that they want to work with you as a writer and you want to try to break in that way, okay? You have to have built a body of work in independent publishing or outside of the main companies that draws the attention of an editor or a writer or an editor who wants to hire you. Or number 6, you have to have built a body of work outside of comics that makes an editor go, I want to hire that person. 6 ways to break in to Marvel or DC. To the best of my knowledge, nothing has changed in that capacity. And you could name any writer writing right now for Marvel or DC, and I'll probably be able to tell you which one of those 6 doors they broke into, okay? I broke into door number 1. I had a staff job at Marvel, and I sold my work that way. That was a long time ago. Peter David did also, okay? Kurt Busiek broke in because he got people at Marvel to know him, door number 2, because Kurt was a prolific letter writer. And then when he started to try to sell his work, all the editors knew who he was, so that they were more amenable. Then Kurt also got a staff job and started selling his writing in-house from a staff job too, okay? So you name any writer then or now, and one of those 6 ways is how they got into Marvel or DC. None of that has anything to do with getting to work on comics. You want to write a comic book, find an artist, write a story, have that artist draw the story, scan the pages, get a PDF, and send it out to 500 friends on your mailing list, or give it away at your store, or give them a URL link where they can go see it online. There are a million more ways to distribute your material now than there used to be 30 years ago. You don't have to go to print and paper anymore and spend that money. You can get people to disseminate your work electronically now, right? So there should be nothing holding you back from getting to write and draw a comic book other than you choosing not to write it, or you not being able to find an artist, or an artist not finishing it. And all those things happen too, but you should be able to do it if you have the desire to do it. And guess what? If it's good, people will talk about it and share it. If it's really good, more people will talk about it and more people will share it. And then eventually someone from one of the companies sees a body of work from outside the industry or out, independents, and decides to call you to do work on a comic book for Marvel or DC, right? So all roads could still lead to that, but you have the control over doing that now in ways that never existed 30 years ago, just because of these wonderful little interwebs. So you have to take advantage of it. And if I were 20 years old or 22 years old right now, and I didn't have a job at Marvel or DC, I'd be trying to find an artist. I'd be going to conventions, or I'd be trying to find an artist through my local comic shop. Whether that artist was great or not makes no difference, because guess what? I'm probably not a great writer at this point yet either. So I would work with them to try to create something, an 8-page story, a 10-page story, not a 500-page magnum opus, but a short story, and get a collection of a few short stories. Maybe they're thematically linked. Maybe they exist in the same world. Maybe it's a recurring character. Those are all your choices creatively, but you build a little body of work that other people can take a look at. And you get other people to look at it. And guess what? Some of those people are going to tell you you suck. And you got to learn how to deal with that too, because that's part and parcel of all of it. You got to put your stuff out there. And the more you put yourself out there, if it's good, the more people start to see it and notice it. Guess what? If it's really good, maybe you get a chance to publish it through Image or something like that, or one of the smaller presses. The options and possibilities are all there. You can get it to print and paper eventually, but you don't have to think about that as your starting point. That's it. That's all I got. That's 30 years. That's all I got.
Well, thank you very much for joining us,
guys.
It was
I really appreciate it too.
a pleasure having you on.
It was a great interview, guys, and you guys were great, by the way. All three of you guys really good back and forth.
By the way, I got to come clean. A lot of people know this story.
Yeah.
But part of my wedding vows was borrowed from your issue of Jean Grey.
Oh my God! You do know that, like, the U2 song is about his divorce, right?
Nah, I don't need to know that.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew that, but I didn't tell the editor, and he found out months later, and he was really mad at me because he thought I was trying to do something subversive. I was like, no, they've had a miserable life, Bob. This is like, and Bono's singing about how he still loves the woman that he's had a miserable divorce with. So it's about forging and carrying on, So I got away with one, is what it amounts to.
Omar, is that also where you got the premise of crying after sex? Did that come from the X-Men book as well?
Nope. That was taken out of context, asshole. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you again to the legendary Fabian NIcieza.
Thank you so much, Fabian. Thank you.
Sir. Guys.
Have a good
night, everybody. I appreciate it.
You as well, sir.
Bye-bye.
Everybody have a great night. This episode was brought to you by In Stock Trades. Don't forget to go there. So I'm gonna stop the broadcast. Everybody have a great night.